Hello, I am Ren Sean, and this is my UnEssay presentation for Dental Anthropology with Dr. Juarez. The topic of this project is the significance of Gigantopithecus blackii dental morphology to the evolution of dental morphology in Homo sapiens. Before I get into the more content-heavy part, I'd like to give a brief background into why I chose this topic and what Gigantopithecus is. When I mentioned Gigantopithecus to my non-anthropology friends, their first thoughts were King Louie from the live-action Jungle Book. Others also mention Yeti or the Bigfoot. This isn't the real Gigantopithecus, though, as glad as I am to see some fictional representation of a real hominid. This early hominid was in the subfamily Ponginae, which is the same one as orangutans. It was very large, especially compared to other hominids, and may have been as much as 3 meters tall in a bipedal stance and 300 kilograms. Unfortunately, much of this information is speculative, since the only remains found of Gigantopithecus thus far have been its teeth and some mandibles. That's why it seemed so perfect for this dental anthropology class. Something important to keep in mind during the rest of this presentation is the possible ecological pressures that may have led to the extinction of Gigantopithecus. During the Pleistocene, the Earth went through a cycle of freezing and unfreezing. This cycle began sapping moisture from the air as it condensed and did not redistribute the same after unfreezing. The forests that supported the diets of Gigantopithecus previously would have slowly converted to more dry plains and meadows. A possibility for their extinction is their inability to adapt their diet to these changes that occurred during the late Pleistocene. This brings us to the primary topic of the presentation. What is the significance of Gigantopithecus's teeth to human teeth today? What can we learn from the success of human dental morphology and failure of Gigantopithecus dental morphology? Each type of tooth will be compared between Homo sapiens and Gigantopithecus blackii, as well as the general tooth enamel of these two hominids. Finally, after comparing all of them, I will clarify the relevance of all that information and what insight it has into human dental evolution. There are some general comparisons I'd like to cover before diving into the incisors. Gigantopithecus has the same dental formula as humans. This is a 2-1-2-3, or 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars, and 3 molars per dental quadrant. The size of Gigantopithecus teeth in comparison to human teeth is an incredibly large difference. According to Dixon, Gigantopithecus third molars have as much as 6 times greater crown volume than the average human. This is also twice as much as the third molars of male gorillas, the largest teeth of any extant primate. The tooth enamel of Gigantopithecus is very thick, even thicker than its extent relative to the orangutans. Humans have thick tooth enamel as well, which is a trait that their closest extent relative, the chimpanzee, lacks. These two different species independently developed this trait based on the environments they were in. Thicker tooth enamel is better for grinding food, since tougher teeth can go through much more demanding mechanical digestion. Also, this slide has the last two-scale image of human and Gigantopithecus teeth. All the future ones will be similar in size in order to compare them more accurately. Looking at the incisors of both these organisms, they very clearly have a different shape. One thing that interests me particularly is how the incisors are rounder in Gigantopithecus, similar to a cylinder, and rounder than the incisors of humans. 2 different articles I read describe them as peg-like, which is a pretty good summary of the more short and stout appearance of Gigantopithecus incisors. It does still have the general concave lingual side and convex labial side that is typical of hominids, but the depressed surface between the marginal ridges is much smaller in relation to the entire crown than it is in humans. The roots are much longer in Gigantopithecus teeth, but the depth of Gigantopithecus's jaw was also much greater than humans, so it makes sense that it would have longer roots. One other aspect I found interesting while I was reading from Zhang and Harrison was that the lower incisors with wear had it on the lingual face particularly, and reached as far as the root. Normally, the lingual surface of mandibular incisors should not be grinding against the maxillary incisors, and this indicates that Gigantopithecus might have had an underbite. Overall, the incisors of Gigantopithecus are not as effective at biting into and cutting food off in order to eat it. On this model, I would like to focus on the canines. The roots of Gigantopithecus canines, similar to the incisors, are much longer than in humans. Also similar to incisors, the canines of Gigantopithecus are much shorter and stouter in relative size compared to human canines. In many examples of Gigantopithecus canines, regardless of sex, they were worn down to the same level as the premolars and molars. This is similar to humans, but unlike most other extant primates, the longer prominent canines are useful in agonistic behavior and establishing dominance, but in both Gigantopithecus and humans, this feature is largely diminished. Looking at these images from Zhang, the canines have some notable differences in shape. The slope, from the top of the crown to the base of the tuberculum, differs between the two specimens. In humans, there is a steeper slope and difference in the maxillary canine here. The less inclined slope of Gigantopithecus maxillary canines is less suited for the piercing and tearing that canines may be useful for. Although, as I noted before, both Gigantopithecus and humans have much smaller and less pronounced canines than other primates. Another notable difference between the canines of Gigantopithecus and humans is the exact shape of them from the lingual surface. Human canines have a generally trapezoidal shape from this view, while Gigantopithecus has a more triangular shape. The premolars of Gigantopithecus are very similar to molars. They are still bicuspid, but they are shorter and stouter like a molar. The wide frame and surface area is more useful for mechanically digesting the food. The roots of premolars and molars are both actually shorter in relation to the jaw than the root size of human premolars and molars. They do have a very similar ratio, though. The relative size of both Gigantopithecus and human postcanine roots are much greater than their closer relatives, chimpanzees and orangutans. Gigantopithecus does have a higher average number of roots in the postcanine teeth. Human premolars may have 1 to 2 roots, and their molars may have 2 to 3 roots. In comparison, Gigantopithecus premolars may have 2 to 3, and molars may have 3 to 4 roots. In this specific graphic, the premolar shown has 2 roots. While a bit unclear, the sample a bit unclear, the distal root is slightly bifurcated. They can tell where a 3rd root might be. In comparison, this human sample only has 1 root in the same premolar. The molars of Gigantopithecus have a much greater crown height than human molars. Great crown height is called hypsodont, and this trait is beneficial to organisms that feed on fibrous foods that need to be ground well. The opposite of hypsodont is brachydont, and human extant primate teeth have this trait. While the crown of Gigantopithecus is still shorter than the crown of animals like horses and cows that very exclusively eat grass and need to mechanically digest it well, it is still notable in comparison to humans. After all these comparisons and notable features, we return to analyze exactly what it tells us. Overall, I'd say the teeth of Gigantopithecus and humans are fairly similar. Morphologically, based on appearance at least, the molars look like very large human molars. Many other hominids also have larger canines and significant sexual dimorphism. However, both Gigantopithecus and humans have smaller and shorter canines. These similarities, like enamel thickness and less pronounced canines, were independently developed in their phylogenetic trees. The Pangolin ancestor likely had some of these traits as well, but to the closest extent humans, chimpanzees, lack these traits. What exactly led to the development of this thick tooth enamel in humans and Gigantopithecus then? Both of these mammals are unlike their relatives in that they did not live in the trees. Gigantopithecus was much too large to live in the trees, and it likely would have been quadrupedal on the jungle floor. Humans similarly left the trees during their evolution and became bipedal. One resource that is not found in the trees and would be found on the ground would be foods like tubers and roots. This food source is much tougher than the fruits or leaves that would have been in the trees. Analysis of the carbon isotopes in the tooth enamel of Gigantopithecus shows that it exclusively ate from C3 plant material. C3 refers to how the carbon cycles the plant, and this is where we start to realize the large dietary difference between Homo sapiens and Gigantopithecus blackii. Gigantopithecus has a much more limited and specialized diet. The foods it ate would have been primarily found in most jungle environments, so as the Ice Age greatly diminished the size of jungle areas, the habitat and available foods to them would have diminished as well. The teeth of Gigantopithecus are largely geared towards grinding food, and with the rapid changes during the Pleistocene, they were unable to keep up and mutate traits that would have helped expand their diet in time to survive. Humans, however, despite having similar traits geared towards grinding, they actually had incisors effective at cutting, canines that could pierce and effectively tear. The environment of hominins, too, was much more open space. They did not depend on the jungle and forested areas for their foods. Of course, the factor of intelligence and fire to cook food also would have made it more possible for humans to survive, since softer foods are easier to chew regardless of teeth. Overall, Gigantopithecus failed by having a very limited diet, while humans thrived by having an adaptable and opportunistic diet. A lot of information about Gigantopithecus is still largely speculative, but I think it's interesting to see just how much we can learn from such limited remains as the teeth. As we move forward with research, hopefully we can find out more. More remains and less just tooth and mandibles. Today, the orangutans face their forests diminishing because of humans expanding and deforestation. This is happening more rapidly than orangutans can mutate and adapt to their environment. While still in the trees, orangutans are largely dependent on the resources of the forest, and their limited diet prevents them from just leaving. It's a similar situation to a Gigantopithecus. Both species are struggling to keep up with a changing world, and Bornean orangutans may face the same end as Gigantopithecus. Looking further into Gigantopithecus and finding more information may be able to help us better understand orangutans and prevent them from disappearing as well. That's all I have for today. Thank you for a great class, and I hope you have a great summer. Dr. Juarez. Aloha.